thank y'all for coming. Now I'm hungry. We did this book for a lot of reasons. The main one was it's a tough year for my mom. She had a battle with cancer, and she endured a massive surgery and then 2 years of chemo in her 80s. And she is right now, I know this because I talked to her just a few minutes ago, she is throwing sticks of firewood at my dog because he is badly behaved. And she is, I came home not too long ago, and here's this 81-year-old woman, and we cut her small firewood so that she can lift it, because she considers heat from her central heat and air system to be unhealthy. I notice she doesn't mind the air conditioning in the summer, but she has a big old fireplace, and so we cut her wood because she would manhandle 70-pound sticks of wood in there, but we cut her these little bitty pieces so she can, won't hurt herself. And she was standing on the porch throwing sticks of wood at my dog. And she can't throw for crap, but she was side-arming them at him. And I said, "Mama, why are you trying to kill my dog?" And apparently, and this will take care of any hunger pangs you might have had, he has become a grave robber, and he digs up cattle or anything or deer that have perished in the woods. And you know how a cat will bring a lizard to you? He will come up in the yard dragging my mama a decomposing billy goat. And the smell is beyond belief. And he's so proud. He's just so proud. And but she survived. She survived as she has always survived. And but it was a long 3 or 4 years. And Mama in the hospital will not wear her gown because it is indecent. So she, and I'm not making this up, in intensive care, she is in her khaki pants with her long-handle thermal underwear. This is in summer. And her canvas shirt and her khaki jacket and a hat and her shoes with 2 pairs of socks because her feet get cold. And the doctors have to treat her through those clothes. And I mean, think about running an IV through 4 layers of union suit. And one person knew what a union suit was. But there was an awful, the doctors would tell her, you need to stay just a little bit longer, and she'd get mad. And mostly because her garden was going to weeds and she wasn't cooking. And she was eating hospital food. And she even dreamed about food. And they were giving her some pretty good drugs, so she had some good dreams. And so I had to go and get her clothes, changes of clothes. And one day I walked in usually I went through the front, but this day I went through the side, and I walked in through her kitchen. And the kitchen always smells, and y'all know this smell. It always smelled of bacon, cornbread, biscuits. It always smelled of pinto beans and ham, which has its own special kind of nutty flavor. It always smelled of meatloaf or bacon chicken or chicken and dressing, or and it always smelled like bacon grease. And this time it was all wrong. It was all the stove, which is never cool. The stove is never cool to the touch. It'd be like the coffee pot is never cool to the touch. But it smelled like old iron. That old burnt iron smell, that old cold iron, and lemon-scented dishwashing detergent. And for some reason, that broke my heart. And I guess I know why it broke my heart. So what I did, I'm looking at myself in this window back here, and my bald spot is considerably bigger than the last time. Just because I talk slow don't mean I'm dumb. So I just stood there for a minute, and it made me think about asking her for a recipe all those times, and she'd say, "Well, hon, I ain't got no recipe. I never had a recipe." And I guess I just would hear that, and then and then she would talk me through things. Like once she had to talk me through a Christmas dinner. I was in Los Angeles and I could not get home. And imagine trying to make pinto beans and ham and in Los Angeles. And quite frankly, my pinto beans and ham are pretty good, but they're not hers. And it just occurred to me that she was right. There were no cookbooks. There were no recipes in a file or in a little index card box. There was none of that. Never had been. So because she and I were going to be pretty well marooned anyway, as she recovered, we just started talking about food. And in a way, I'd always talked about food. I'd always talked about food. So it turned out to be some of the most fun I've ever had. Those of you who've read my books know that there is some sadness in them, some great sadness in them, and there's some grit in them. We were not a gentle people, except in the hearts of maybe my mother and my aunts and my grandmother. We were just not a gentle people. So there's a good bit of shooting and killing and fighting and stabbing and this one, there is sadness, but it is the narrative of our food. And there's only one killing in it that I can think of. And there's a couple of shootings, three shootings, but mostly it's just theft, and during the Great Depression, my great-grandfather saw no reason why. He didn't like landlords anyway, so he saw no reason why there could not be if he saw a pig trotting by, he kind of saw that as a pig for the world. My uncle stole pig's feet, which you'd think they'd miss less than a good ham, from my Uncle Newt Morrison's smokehouse, and also stole chickens, but they preferred to steal from the smokehouse because, quoting my Uncle Bill, a ham don't make much noise. So there is some sin here. It's not that gentle, but it's the gentlest book I ever did. I used to think gentle was dull, but it found out it ain't. So we did it, I guess, for the fancy word would be archival reasons. We did it so there would be a record of these people and there would be a record of their food. I've done that in other books for the same purpose. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. And it beats the hell out of working. But I guess this one was sweeter, I hope, maybe a little bit. And not just because there's a recipe for butter rolls that basically is a dumpling, a biscuit dumpling, swimming in sweetened milk with vanilla and butter and cinnamon. And if you've never had one, they're called butter rolls. I don't know why they call them, but I guess because they start out with a little biscuit, But basically they're almost they are dumpling-like. Look, let's face it, a dumpling is kind of gummy in texture, and these are a little bit gummy, but they're gummy delicious. I mean, they're and so there's everything in here, but it begins. The genesis of our food is not a sweet little old lady, with flour on the end of her nose and dusting her apron off. It doesn't start like that. It starts with a mean old SOB, a mean old man named Jimmy Jim Bunner. He had a fury in him. I mean, he was a logger and a fighter and a drinker. And he had been involved in a terrible fight. Jimmy Jim is the one, if you hearken back to Ava's man, Jim is the one who bit the man's finger off in the fist fight and then went home and put it on the mantle. And people wonder why I am the way I am. But Jim could cook. He cooked for logging crews. He cooked for farm crews. He cooked for chain gangs. And he cooked the food of the people of the foothills of the Appalachians. He cooked collards that you only picked after the first frost because that is when they were at their best. He cooked pinto beans and ham. He cooked white beans or northern beans or baby limas or butter beans that slow cooked with pork spare ribs. He cooked a porridge that was as simple as just a cool cornbread mixture, slowly added to hot, buttery chicken broth, cooked with onions and celery, maybe a carrot or two. But carrots were not that common in that red clay. And he cooked sausage gravy and biscuits. He cooked red-eye gravy. He cooked, poured over diced tomato piled high on a hot biscuit so that red-eye gravy, which is just meat grease from ham slices or white meat, we call it white meat, fatback, fried, and then in that grease, I'll call it oil if it'll make you delicate people feel better. But in that hot grease is added, and it doesn't matter if it's 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. If you got 1/4 of an inch, you got a lot of grease. But in that iron skillet, in that hot grease is stirred an equal measure of black coffee. And you reach down with a spoon and scrape those bits and pieces of, in New Orleans they call it the debris, but get down in there and scrape that stuff up and get it swirling around, and it will combine. That hot oil and that coffee will combine. And there'll be little puddles of the hot oil, little bubbles of the hot oil in there. And you either, with a big spoon, or if you're brave and don't commit any third-degree burns, you can pour that over that mound of red tomato. And it does something to it as it trickles down through there, and it wilts that tomato, and it pools in that biscuit. And I can't tell you why it's good. I'm not a good, and I mean this, I'm not being facetious. I'm not a good enough writer to explain to you why it's so good. But that on a big ceramic plate with a chip out of one side, that and one of those ham slices and 2 fried eggs, and grits if you can get them. And I'll eat grits with anything. If you've never had fried trout, like brackish water trout, and I guess it would be just as good with brook trout or with, but fried trout with cheese grits and beets, sliced beets. It might not, but again, it's never mind. Anyway, I got sidetracked. This was my point. But Jim was a savant of food, and not just that heavy food, but lighter things. Sweet corn at just the right day. Pulled at just the right day. Stewed squash. Fried okra that is not some sports bar kind of thing. When did fried okra get to be like a sports bar? But just lightly dusted with cornmeal and fried in just enough grease to avoid a catastrophe. And, green fried tomatoes, stewed everything, stewed cabbage. He would make porridge, like I said, and then he would fry cabbage or stew cabbage and fry apples. And, just think, how, on a winter day, how good that would be. And, we're like y'all, we have real winter. We don't have that veranda winter. But Jim was our savant. And my grandpa, Charlie Bundrum, married my grandma Ava for love, because she sure as hell couldn't cook. and married her under false pretenses. Her false pretenses, because she had her sisters were the instigators. They packed a box supper, and how people would bid on them at dances, and he saw her and thought she was lovely and bid a whole $1. Think about that, a whole $1 back then, before the Depression. And for this box of fried chicken and pie and, good biscuits, and everything about it was good. And he fell in love, and they married, and then he found out he had been bamboozled. Her sisters, tired of her peculiarity and hard-headedness, did it to get her out of the house. So they married, and she proceeded to starve him to death. And as a matter of fact, that's my favorite quote in the whole book. So my grandfather, who had several jobs, he was a well digger, he was a carpenter, he also made liquor and packed it out of the mountain. And he never got caught for making it, but he did get caught once for packing it. Well, he got caught several times for packing it out. But you know how county sheriffs are. They say, if you ever do that again, I'll send you off. And that's worse than going to jail. Sending you off means they send you to either the federal pen in Atlanta or the state big house down there. Back then it was Kilby. And but as we like to say, that's another story. But he was starving because she didn't care about food. My grandma, she was that big around, and she didn't care about food. She saw no point in it. And she would make vegetable soup with no salt. Now think about that for a minute. With no salt. Tomatoes love salt, right? And no salt. And she would make biscuits that rose to the height of a vanilla wafer. And I'm not making this up. She probably invented the tortilla in Northeast Alabama, because she would make cornbread that would be like a sheet of Blue Horse notebook paper. And if he would complain, she would quote to him from the Bible of the virtue of unleavened bread. So he was dying. He was dying. He was skinny anyway. Now he's like, and he tried. He got old women to come in and try to teach her to cook, because he thought that was the wisest course, and it usually is the wisest course. She ran them off. Kinfolks, third cousins, friends, neighbors. My grandma, if you have not read the book Ava's Man, you should, because that is a study in beautiful, streamlined individualism. There wasn't anybody on this earth like Ava. So, in desperation, he thought of his daddy. But there was a problem. He had been involved in a killing and had to flee across the state line into the high mountains of North Georgia. Now, I wish there was a prettier way to say this, but he was hiding out. And there's no telling how long he might have stayed. But my grandfather, in desperation, got on his gray mule, and my mama wanted to make sure that it was a gray mule, that I got that point across. Got on a gray mule and rode into the mountains of North Georgia to search for his father, and found him. And he comes riding up to this clearing, and here's this old man, smelling like wood smoke and chewing tobacco, and, he was always smoking a pipe. He had an honest-to-God corncob pipe. And he was one of those smokers that never had to really touch it. He could move it around from side to side in his mouth, just amazing. And if it was out, if it was unlit, he turned it upside down, just because he could, because he wanted to. It didn't mean he took it out of his mouth, and he would breathe through it, suck, you'd hear the air going, y'all know what I'm talking about, kind of like that. And he had a bushy mustache that he trimmed, not like this other man we know, but he trimmed it right here, so it come down to like right here, and it was like thick as like a briar bush. And here he is squatting in this clearing, and my grandfather rides up and he looks at his son. He hadn't seen him in a while, and says, my God, boy, you're skin and bones, or something like that. And my grandfather, it's my favorite quote, said, "Yes, I am, Daddy, and this is the way they talked, for I have married a pretty woman who cannot cook. And I do believe I am starving to death." And the details will come apparent in the book. 500 pages, I should have got to it. But it's the story of him getting up behind that mule and coming home with his boy, and teaching through much bloodshed. But they were the same person. That hard-headed old man and my grandma were the same person. And through that heat and fire and cursing, she wanted to push him down a well once, and went looking for a well. Went looking for an abandoned well on this old home place that had either burned or rotted down. I think it burned. And she's wandering around, and the neighbor says, "Can I help you, young miss?" And she says, I hear there used to be a well hereabouts. And the man said, why, yes, ma'am. It was over yonder, but we filled it in after 2 people fell down it. And she said, pity. and he said, oh no, young miss, we fished them out before we did that. But she meant, there went her chance. And I don't believe she would have pushed my great-grandfather down a well. I do not believe she would have done it. But if she had done it, she wouldn't have just pushed him down the well and went away. She would have pushed him down the well, and then she would have sat down beside it and sung him a song. So that was the genesis. And, he taught my grandma taught my mother and her daughters, and then she cooked it for us. But some of those recipes go back to before white settlement in this part of the world. Some of those recipes go back to the creeks. That porridge recipe is old. They mixed it with rabbit. We were mostly chicken in our recipe, but rabbit, squirrel makes a good kind of dumpling or porridge. I don't really like squirrel because they're cute, and I don't like rabbit because I really like rabbit. I just ain't gonna eat no more rabbit. I'm not gonna do it. I don't care how many times they show it on the Food Channel. And I like pigs, but I'll eat a pig. I'm going to read just a paragraph, and then we're going to take some questions. And y'all have heard me before. This ain't nothing new. I ain't got no better. Matter of fact, I might have gone considerably downhill. But I do hope you like this book. But this is the beginning, and it explains a lot. Since she was 11 years old, even if all she had to work with was neck bones, pepper grass, or poke salad, she put good food on a plate. She cooked for dead broke uncles, hungover brothers, shade tree mechanics, faith healers, dice shooters, hairdressers, pipe fitters, crop dusters, high steel walkers, and deep well diggers. She cooked for iron workers, Avon ladies, highway patrolmen, sweatshop seamstresses, fortune tellers, coal haulers, dirt track daredevils, and dime store girls. She cooked for lost souls stumbling home from Aunt Hattie's beer joint, and for singing cowboys on the AM radio. She cooked in her first 80 years more than 70,000 meals, as basic as hot butter biscuits with pear preserves or muscadine jelly, as exotic as tender braised beef tripe and white milk gravy, all in kitchens where the only ventilation was the banging of a screen door. She cooked for people she'd just as soon poison, and for the loves of her life. She cooked for rich ladies in town, melting beef short ribs into potatoes and hot Spanish onions, another woman's baby on her hip, and sleepwalked home to feed her own boys home-canned blackberries dusted with sugar as a late-night snack. She pan-fried chicken in Red's barbecue with a crust so crisp and thin it was mostly in the imagination, and deep-fried fresh brim and crappie and hush puppies redolent with green onion and government cheese. She seasoned pinto beans with ham bone and baked crackling cornbread for old women who tugged a pick sack, and stewed fat spare ribs and creamy butter beans that truck drivers would brag on 3,000 miles from home. She spiked collard greens with cane sugar and hot pepper for old men who fought the Hun on the Hindenburg line, and simmered chicken and dumplings for mill workers with cotton lint still stuck in their hair. She fried thin apple pies in white butter and cinnamon for pretty young women with bus tickets out of this one-horse town, and baked sweet potato cobbler for the grimy pipe fitters and dusty bricklayers that they left behind. She cooked for big-haired waitresses at the Fuzzy Duck Lounge, shiny-eyed pilgrims at the Congregational Holiness Campground, and crew-cut teenage boys who read comic books beside her banana pudding, then embarked for Vietnam. She cooked most of all to make it taste good. Because how do you serve dull food to people such as this? She became famous for it, became the best cook in the world, if the world ends just this side of Cedartown. But she never used a cookbook, not in her whole life. She never cooked from a written recipe of any kind and never wrote down one of her own. She cooked with ghosts at her right hand, and you can believe that or not. The people who taught her the secrets of Southern blue-collar cooking are gone now, and they did not cook from a book either. Most of them did not know how to read. Every time the old woman stepped from her workshop of steel spoons, iron skillets, and blackened pots, all she knew about the food left with her, in the way that when a bird flies off a wire, it leaves only a black line on the sky. Thank y'all. Y'all remember when we used to be able to go long minutes without toting a bottle of water around with us? A whole nation of dehydrated people, we didn't even know it. I guess because it would have just been damned inconvenient to carry a water bucket around with us everywhere we went. So let's take some questions. I know y'all, I've been here before. You are not bashful. So is there anyone that is just dying to know the deep under... Oh, sweet Lord, that scared the hell out of me. Is there anyone that has a question? Yes, ma'am.
What did your mother think about the book?
Oh, we'll choose not to answer that one. No, she look, it's like every other book I've ever started in my life. At first, she just didn't see the point to it. She never understood that All Over But the Shouting was important to people. And then after about a few tens of thousands or maybe more than that, people wrote her and told her, or stopped her and told her, or sent her presents in the mail, then she began to realize that if maybe it was important to them, it was maybe important, period. But, everybody did that. And everybody did this in her world. I told her, she said, "What are you going to even call it like that?" And I said, "We're going to call it the best cook in the world." And this look of disgust came on her face, and she said, "I wasn't even the best cook that lived on our road." And she said, "My mama was a good cook. And my sister, Edna," and my Aunt Edna passed a few years ago, but she was an excellent cook. But then my mama's pride took over, and she said, "Now, I guess me and Edna did run a good race." And I just told her, I said, "Mama, that may all be true, but the third best cook on the Roy Webb Road don't sing. It doesn't sing. This sings. This sings." This is one of my favorite book titles. And, those of you who've looked at it or have read it know it's a cookbook in that it has recipes, but they are written. They're not just static. They're written. And Mama comments all the way through them and tells you exactly what she thinks. Now, that doesn't mean she makes it any more clear. It just means that she tells you what she thinks. And I don't know, I'll be honest with you. She can't see really anymore. I mean, she can see enough to watch like Jimmy Swaggart on the TV or her Western. She's been madly in love. She's been carrying a torch for, I guess, about 60 years for Jim Drury, the Virginian, on the Virginian, the title character on the Virginia. She's been sweet on him for a long time. Then she saw him on TV, and he'd got old and he'd got fat. Oh, and it just broke her heart. And I said, "My God, Mama, what did you think was going to happen?" Anyway, I digress. But so what she said was, you read it to me. But see, the thing she did, I'd already read it to her. I read her big chunks of it because it's better to always head things off at the pass. That old saying, it's easy. What is it? It's easier to apologize, ask forgiveness than permission. Not in my damn family, it's not. I went to a book signing in my hometown. And we could draw 700, 800. I mean, we draw a big old crowd. And I guess we don't get as good a cable as y'all do. But anyway, one of my cousins, cousin Carlos, he's the one that his daddy named for a label he saw on a crate of Mexican apples, and it's actually Carlos back in the 1930s, but it's because we're where we are, we pronounced it Carlos. So I thought his name was spelled Carlyss. But anyway, he called me up and he said, "Rick, I need to talk to you. I ain't going to give you the cousin's name, but cousin so-and-so has said he's got to drinking. And he said if you come to town and talk about your book, he's going to cut you." Look, there are many witnesses to this. I took the stage in the Leon Cole Auditorium with like some of the biggest policemen you have ever seen. Yeah. Look, I ain't above mixing it up. If it had been a cousin who'd said, "I'm going to kick your behind," then we could have joined in that endeavor. It would not be the first time somebody knocked me down. I have been knocked down so hard I tried to crawl under a Torino to get away. And so, but listen, cutting is different. Right? Look, shooting is sudden, but cutting is the deliberate, terrible thing. And I didn't want to be part of that. And so I didn't really mind the police, except, here are all these tough old boys that, I went to school with, and all these tough old boys who knew me. I'd done pick and shovel work with them, and I have to take the stage with a security detail. So I don't know how we got off on that, because you asked a really good question. But the point is, I have to read it to her out loud, anew. And I got her CDs, I always do the digital. I do the audio. I read it because I have such a mellifluous, eloquent, sophisticated Southern accent. And that you just can't find a good white trash Southern accent. Just, let's face it, you just can't stop on the side of a dirt road and find somebody that, well, actually you can. I think she will like it. I think that her pride will take over. And, again, she already knows 90% of it, but I think when she hears me read it to her, and besides that, if I get to a part I think she won't like, I'll skip it. So let me go. Oh, yes, sir.
To you, is the book less about the recipes and more about the stories and the traditions behind them?
That's a good question. And yes, it's more about the narrative because we got the stories. Have y'all ever heard the phrase dog's breakfast? In journalism and newspaper business, that was a story that didn't quite fit here and it didn't quite fit there, but it needed to be done. It had a bunch of good stuff in it. And in some ways, as y'all can tell, I'm prone to run off on a tangent. So in some ways, the narrative of this, was always there. But I couldn't really run off down that trail. And, every book I'd ever written would then be this long. So the stories we had these great stories. The night the pig, I love this phrase, the night the pig suicided itself. You know, my grandpa didn't like, you know, he didn't like landlords, and he inherited it. Scotch-Irish, you know, he didn't like landlords, so he would move his family. Sometimes I think he did it just for sport. He would move his family like a month after the rent was due, and they would move in the middle of the night. And if they went across the state line, again, that's like crossing the line of demarcation. You know, if you went across the state line, it's like we had a wall there. You know, so he would move. And one night he was moving, and he had to move the pig last, and the pig was as long as me and probably weighed between 500 pounds. We're talking massive hog. And they were trying to prod it toward a chute to get it onto the back of the pickup truck where they had sideboards. And, well, he didn't want to go that way. And he ran head first at full speed into the steel bumper of the truck and fell over dead. Causing my Grandma Ava to say it suicided itself. And my mama, I'm not making this up. This is honest God truth. My mama, and this is how stories go in my family. She said, and I swallowed my marble. And I said, you know, and I'm 58, so I can cuss in front of Mama now. I said, what the hell do you mean you swallowed your marble? And she said, well, back then when I was that age, and she was little, she said, I used to tote a marble in my mouth and tell all the other kids I had a jawbreaker, you know, a piece of candy. And she said, they didn't know. And it never did wear out. And I said, I guess not. And she said, and when that pig suicided itself, I swallowed my marble. And then she said, and you know, after that, I could talk plain. I said, why couldn't you talk plain? And she said, I just couldn't talk plain back then. People used to make fun of me because I couldn't say 13 and 14. I'd say 13 and 14. And I said, do you think that was because you had a marble in your mouth? So anyway, she swallowed the marble and began to talk plain. And they had 500 pounds of dead pork in the middle of the night that had to be butchered in the dark, you know, I mean, literally by oil lantern. Because you don't want a bright light, and you can't really process it. They had to chop him up. Think mafia, you know. They had to chop him up and put him in big tubs, wash tubs, and haul him off that way. And so they get him to the new house, you know, before dawn, because you got to get out of there before dawn. And get him to the new house. And my grandma Ava rewards them by frying a big skillet of hog liver. No, I know. I mean, look, some people like it. I never have been able. I love chicken livers. I can eat 1,000,000 of them. I really don't like hog liver. Does anybody like hog liver? It's okay if you raise your hand. It's fine. You like it? Yeah. I mean, look, onions and gravy. It's a good excuse for onions and gravy. You know, But the kids, even these were poor kids. These were depression kids. But they didn't really dance in circles at the prospect of hog liver. But that night, she told them, she said, I'll cook us something good. And, you know, you cook the liver first because you had to. You had to cook it first. But that night, she took the spare ribs. And I remember, this hog is this high at the ridge of its back, this wide, you know, which is, those hogs were long and not necessarily big-bellied, you know, but the ribs were probably that long. And the end of the rib was probably as big as my fist, and that luscious fat. And And what she did, she took big butter beans, what they call in the grocery store large limas, and she just put them on to slow cook with one small whole onion. She just put the whole onion in there, the right amount of salt, and then she just put those ribs in the beans, and they cooked together for 3.5, 4 hours. And I mean, just imagine, the mixture, of what that was like. So now I forgot that damn question. But the point is, no, the narratives, the narratives we had, it was the science, the translation of the recipe that was miserably hard to do, So I just gave up, and I wrote the recipes the way Mama told them to me. And there is a list of ingredients. You can cook them. But a bunch of snooty chefs have asked me, they've said, well, did you have a test kitchen prepare this or something? I said, look, I am 6'2" and 230 pounds. I am a test kitchen. And, but, it was, that was hard. So yeah, I think it was the narrative, the story. Now, sometimes if there was a dish that I just loved, of course fried chicken had to be in there. And then you just get lucky, But see, here's the thing. The recipe you use does not have to. How many times do you think they cook fried chicken? Probably once a week not during the Depression, but once a week in fat times. They probably had pork 4 or 5 times, and if you count seasoning, more than that. So that was hard, was that. But no, it started with the stories. Because I don't think I would have done it otherwise. Because I'm just not a cook. I suck. I'm terribly bad. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Since the recipes weren't written down, in order to get your narrative and to get the details too, did you take notes as she cooked or just as she talked?
I wish I were diligent enough to have stood over her as she did that, but that would have taken until I was dead 40 years. So what I did was I sat beside her. My mama has a big leather chair, and Mama's almost 6 feet tall. I mean, Mama's tall. So little chairs, she looks like a kid in a children's room with her knees up high. She's got real long legs. Her legs are longer than mine. I have a Toyota Land Cruiser, old Toyota Land Cruiser, and she just steps, it's 4-wheel drive, she just steps into it, my daddy was, kind of like Alan Ladd. He was a small man. So all our height, all the boys are genetic experiments, no, what I did was this. She sat in her chair, her big leather chair, which she calls her depression chair. And I said, why, Mama? Because I bought that damn chair at Haverty's. I know it wasn't no damn depression chair. Go to Haverty's and try to buy a chair. And then when you come back without your car, see how that worked out for you, But I found her a big old comfortable leather chair, and everybody's out there going, but she sat there, and I sat next to her in my own she calls it the depression chair because that's where she sits when she's depressed. But she sits there all the time, which don't make me feel good. So basically, I went into debt to get her a chair to be depressed in. But anyway, moving right along, I'm not bitter about that. And so she sat there, and I sat across from her or beside her, and I said, all right, today we're doing what she calls chicken broth, which is like a porridge. Today we're doing that. Where'd it come from? Tell me. And I knew the genesis of it. I knew the stories. But I had to do that because that was one of my favorite things. That one started with a recipe. And then I said, tell me where it comes from. And then it was just very easy because that was the period when the old man was teaching Ava to cook. So the narrative then was just, I was able to join the narrative in the food. But I just sat beside her and I said, okay, tell me how you do this. And I had seen her do it through the kitchen door, because as children, she wouldn't let us in. I mean, we always had some kind of terrible effluvium on us. And it was, we were nasty children. And Mama wasn't so fastidious that that's a word, right? Is that a good word? Did I say it right? Look at me go. But she, God, almost fell down. But she just wouldn't, she likes to be alone when she cooks. And then it occurred to me, and this was the whole point of this book, she's never alone when she cooks. Her mama's with her aunts are with her great aunts. Sis Morrison, maybe the best cook in the family line, who, the day she made a real good chicken and dressing, she shot her husband in the teeth with a .22 pistol. Tell me you can't make a narrative out of that. How we doing? One more? They run this damn thing like an Italian train, so we'll take these two gentlemen right here. Yes, sir. Let's start with whoever. You go first, and I'll take you and finish up. Unless you're going to ask me an embarrassing question, and then we'll take... Okay. Yes, sir.
10 years ago in Akron, Ohio, we were doing a tour for Prince of Town.
Yes.
I asked you a question, and you said it was the hardest question on tour, so this should be easier.
Okay.
And I'm hungry like everybody else after talking about books. But I asked you then, as the first in your family to make a living with your mind outside your body, and I was the same thing, as high school graduate, college. How do you straddle those two worlds? You respect the people that did what they did, but you have your dream that you can't turn your family for. You can't turn your brothers, your mom, any of those people. They can love you and support you, but they can't tell you what it's like to rock for the times or to go be a college professor. And you said, you just go out and do it. And those, I'm sorry.
No. I don't know. Go ahead.
I'm not traveling around. I'm back here. I'm not calling. I finally came back home. But I remember you signed my book that night because, about, we know this ground that we walk and we can get from these people. But that ground we'll never know until we jump over that fence. Right. And the 10 years since then, and the things you've been doing and teaching and coming back to this book, have you any more answers? Have been any clearer or...
Yeah, I think maybe one is that, look, we know this. You grow up, I remember, look, a lot of people read my books, and no matter how much detail I put in there, they still think it's the Waltons. They think everybody in a big old farmhouse is saying, "Good night, Jim Bob." And it wasn't like that. It was a Jim Walter home. Y'all know what those are, little wood frame houses. And it was the smallest one you could buy. And you could stand in the middle of the living room and with your left hand touch the window looking out on the front yard, and with your right hand touch the wall. And that didn't mean we didn't have like 18 pieces of furniture in it. And we did indeed have 2 TVs, one big console TV, it didn't work, and a little black and white sitting on top of that. We just did, But we didn't have hot water in the kitchen, and we didn't have a bathroom. Bathroom was out back. We got a bathroom when I was in high school. And we lived in other people's houses. So it's a different kind of... So you spend a lot of time... I don't believe in moral victories. So I really wasn't much of a dreamer. I knew there was a way out. And a good person and a good hard-working person, a thoughtful person, would have got good grades, got a scholarship, gone to college, and then, done something productive. I did something else. But I knew I could tell a story, and I thought that would carry me out. And it did. But it doesn't really. The thing I've realized when my mom got sick, I've always known you can't get away from it, And why would you want to when going home is like, I would bump into my Uncle Jimbo in in the parking lot of the food outlet grocery store, which recently closed because of, downturns in the economy. And Jimbo is 92, was 92, and he looks just like those men in my books, the cover of Ava's Man. And I'd say, "How you doing, Jim?" And he'd say, "I've been running around up at the cemetery." And I said, "Why are you hanging out in the cemetery?" And he said, "'Cause, son, that's where the widow women are." So after years, even when I realized that any worth and value that I have as a writer is bound to those people, is bound to them. I went and sat with my aunts, Joe and my Aunt Juanita, and they've got a lot of age on them now, and their health is not good. And I sat there and but they survive. And you know how some older folks, there will be a little dust here and there because, they save things. And there were my books on top of everything else, on top of that. So, I guess I knew when I wrote Shouting that you don't get out. I can't answer that question with any clarity because I still don't know. But what I do know is this. I think about my people and the bad decisions they make. Sometimes they make decisions that I think they're bad because they make decisions against their own interest. They make decisions that hurt themselves. They make decisions sometimes based on the way they were raised, or, they were led in the wrong direction by prophets that were not true. But I think about my Uncle Ed, who died recently, and he had steel rods in both legs. He had been run over by a car, and he had steel rods holding both legs together. And when I was a little boy, I would take a chisel and hold it against the bead of a truck tire, and he would swing a sledge and hit the end of the chisel, and we would break that rubber loose from the bead, and then we would patch it and put it back together. But when he'd come down with that sledge, I can still see him in those like oil-stained khaki work clothes, and he'd swing down and he'd hit dead solid. And once I got older and I looked up at him and said, "Uncle Ed, what if you miss?" And the look on his face was just this puzzlement. And he looked at me and said, "Well, son, I won't miss. I won't miss." So I don't know. Which kind of man would I rather be? I know it's easier to do this. It's easier. Room service is a good invention. Even if it ain't real good, you kind of, But what kind of, I can do this. I think I've got this knocked. I ain't going to be the man he was. So I'm no closer. I'm sorry. It took me a damn long time. Huh? You come back in 10 years, and if I don't have an answer, we'll just lie. Right? And then we'll finish. I'm sorry, but that's a good question. Yes?
It occurs to me that the culture that produced you is also the one that produced Hank Williams. And his music has a lot of similar qualities. Not as funny, but it's lyrical and it's sentimental. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about parallels or the contrast between your work and his, and for that matter, between yours and the author of Hillbilly Elegy.
Well, I'm not sure I have much in common there because I'm, I don't have technically I'm still a freshman at Jacksonville State University. I went to college, briefly, and I did go to Harvard. I went to Harvard on a Neiman Fellowship, but I didn't get to go because I was studious or smart or worked my way to a scholarship or any of that. So I don't know if I've got much in common with that book. My books are different. But Hank, in my wildest dreams, I would like to think I have something in common with Hank Williams. But the one thing I know we have in common is this. What Hank did, and we'll finish on this, and thank y'all for being patient with me. But what Hank did was Hank spread the pain of that life, of those women who, felt those needles pierce their fingers in those sweatshops, and those cotton mill workers that breathed in that dust until they walked away with bisonosis, and coal miners that, what kind of man can be a coal miner? My God, what guts it must take to work in a hole. And then just living, a boy that calls another man his daddy, the losing love. And what Hank did was he spread all that pain out in his songs. It went out over the airwaves, and instead of intensifying or drawing it out of us, it was already there. He didn't have to draw it out of us. It was already in us. And I wasn't yet born. But I know, listening to my people talk, that it spread that pain out thin enough to where you could stand it. And I hope that if there is a deeper meaning in this. And the reason that I act a fool up here is because, look, if I start talking about the underlying reasons for doing all this, I'll start to cry, and I'm 6'2". A man my size starts to cry in front of a group of Southerners, they'll drag him outside and beat him to death. We don't want that sensitivity gene to catch on. Next thing you know, we'll be writing poetry and voting Democrat. But Jerry Lee Lewis said something, and this is what I would like to think I can do. He was talking about Hank Williams. I spent 2 summers at Jerry Lee's bedside, and Jerry Lee said, Hank. I'd said that I think Hank got my people off their knees. Now they weren't on their knees because they were weak. They were on their knees because they worked there. And he liked my line about how Hank got them up off their knees, and he took that pipe out. He took that pipe out of his mouth and said, "I like that." He said, "Hank got them up off their knees, and Jerry Lee set them to dancing." Thank you. We'll be out here.